Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the How to Succeed podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague, and I got a very special guest this week, Lisa Ellis. She's head of product here at Sandler, and she's been doing some really cool things helping us reimagine our sales training program that's been world famous for over 50 years. So it's a big task, but we have some really cool stuff coming for you soon. And also, we want to talk about some of the choices in new modern adult learning that we've been talking about. So this is How to Succeed at Collaborative Learning with Lisa Ellis. The podcast is copyrighted by Sandler Systems, Inc., protected by U.S. copyright laws, and Sandler is the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training. Find more information at sandler.com. All right, Lisa, first question, what is collaborative learning, and what are we talking about today?
So collaborative learning is really just talking about how do you foster in that learning environment collaboration between the people who are there to learn and the facilitator who's kind of running the show. Because what we know about adult learners is they like autonomy. So they like to make choices about how they learn, what they learn, and they also bring a lot of really valuable knowledge and experience into any training environment. So really what we at Sandler do really well is bring that out in our live sessions. And so we like to foster that collaboration between learners and facilitators to really drive powerful outcomes. So that's what collaborative learning is.
I love it. And there's so many kind of meta and interesting things about Sandler. Like one of our Sandler rules for sales is you can't sell anybody anything until they discover that they want it. And I feel like the same thing goes as a trainer. You can't teach anybody anything until they discover what's in it for them, and you make them a part of the process and you help them uncover these connections and things. So I think that's a decent start for our attitude discussion here of why would we want to do collaborative learning versus, I don't know, online learning, video recordings, lecture, all of the other, learning methods that are available.
Yeah, and so collaborative learning can happen in that instructor-led, like facilitated environment with a really great facilitator, but it can also happen self-directed online with other resources because you could be collaborating through chat groups or forums, or your latest Discord. I think that one of the things that really struck me when I was getting my start in education was thinking about how do we give people choice and get them to buy into what you're learning. So I got my start in science communication and science education. And so you can think that a lot of people might have these entrenched beliefs. We learn something new in science. Well, how do they learn it? Lecturing at them isn't going to get them to buy into the new message, right? You've got to open this dialogue and conversation and bring them on board. And so that's where I really think that mindset that great learning happens in collaboration between a learner and some type of information giver, and that's where the sweet spot really happens.
And I guess we could roll back a little bit. You don't have to give us the history of education, but I feel like lecture's been around for like 400 years and
Mhm.
stuff. And sometimes I don't even know that schools now are like they were when I went to school or when some of the leaders in our organizations went to school. And we think, lecture, raise your hand if you have a question, or if I ask a question, you answer it. And then some sort of pop quiz or knowledge test at the end. Can you describe a little bit of the modern just adult learning concepts or things that are maybe different from what people remember from their previous education?
Yeah, and I think it depends on where you're getting your education. Are you talking about something formal like school or college? Or are you talking about the on the job training that you got because your manager told you to do a task that you didn't really know how to do, but you figured it out anyway? Because there's all different ways that we learn. So if we think about a formal learning environment, a lot of us were conditioned to sit still, listen to a teacher, absorb the information, take notes, and then pass a test. That's how we were conditioned to learn because that was thought to be the best way of teaching. Now, we know now, and what neuroscience tells us is the best way to teach is actually to get the learners to experience the concepts and techniques or attitudes that you're trying to teach in multiple different contexts. So you're not just going to lecture at them. You're going to give them a scenario to explore. You're not just going to give them a test. You're going to give them a project to do, all around the same concepts. So what you might be seeing if you've got, kids in school or young kids is they're going to be focusing on, a lesson plan and a set of learning objectives, but they're going to be exploring it in lots of different ways. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited about Sandler, because we've had this great history of having tons of ways to explore our content. And I think we're even putting our foot on the gas there too, in terms of some of the newer avatar based content that we're going to be coming out with later this year.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and I want to save some of that for our technique discussion here in a minute. So we won't quite unwrap that present yet. But in the new sales development series, we try to do that, exactly what you're saying, as much as possible. That there's manager discussions you can have in your sales team meetings. There's role
Mhm.
plays and sales simulators that you can do to practice the information. And there are online videos and lectures and discussions of how you can kind of discover that content for the first time. But I think you really highlighted, it goes all the way back to our founder, David Sandler, wrote the book, You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar. And I think to wrap up our attitude part here is it really depends on what you're doing. If you're trying to get somebody to memorize the capitals of all 50 states, you can do that in a variety of different ways. It's really repetition. But if you're trying to get somebody to learn how to read a prospect and ask the right question at the right time, or how to deliver a pitch with the right tonality and the right nonverbal communication, that's a totally different skill, and skills are different than knowledge, right? So
Completely. Yes.
behavior here, how do we do the right thing at the right time and understand what are we trying to communicate and learn versus like how we do that through the different methodologies.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you think about a skill, first you have to tell them what it is, right? So you tell them what the skill is, you give them an example. So we do a lot of demonstration, and we always try and personalize that to make it as real as possible for whatever environment the learners are in. Short sales cycle, long sales cycle, depending on your vertical, we will personalize that modeling so you can see that skill set in the context of your real sales motion. And then we give you chances to practice that. So then you're immediately going in and applying what you saw, get a chance to get comfortable with it, fail in a safe place before you're in front of a live client. And then we give you even more structure to take it away from our sessions and go try it out with a peer, with your manager. We also, some of our best clients go through our ambassador program and therefore have a certified Sandler expert in their business who can set up like coaching and excellence groups around these sales techniques, which I think is really, really powerful.
Yeah, it's so cool. And again, it goes back almost 50 years for Sandler here, because so many gurus and sales experts, they write a book and then they come up with a lecture and they'll fly into town and they'll do a nice 2-day boot camp or a sales kickoff. And I think a lot of organizations have fallen into that trap of like, we're just going to do 2 weeks of onboarding for our new employees and then they're magically fixed. They're going to sell for the rest of their career, the next 20 years, from that 2 weeks that they learned. And I think all of us realize that that's probably not true. If we really want people performing at the highest levels, that's what this show is built on. We need to work on their attitude, that some days they're going to have bad streaks and some days they're going to have hot streaks. And some days they're not going to know what to do, or some days they're going to be scared to make that phone call because it's a difficult conversation and we're raising prices or the supply chain got messed up. And those are all different things that we need to work on an ongoing basis, rather than just that one time we did it, we learned the concept, we know what the right answer is, and moving on, because we can't really ever move on or stop learning, right?
Yeah, and when it comes to that real behavior change, that's what you're talking about. It's that continually moving that boulder up the hill, right? Trying to get yourself in better shape. When you go to a training event like that, you go to an SKO, you can leave feeling energized. And like, I don't want to discredit the value of that shift in mindset, because that is really powerful in terms of getting you over to the hump to the next step, so that you go back to it and try it again and try it again. So I think there is value in that, but you're not going to be, downhill mountain biking after a seminar. That's for sure.
So let's talk about the right information at the right time too, because in reimagining our sales development series, we've had to make some really hard choices. That we have years of information. I mean, we have 400 trainers, 50 years of experience. We've trained over 1 million people. There is a lot of information we could dispense. But you've had the tough job with your team of distilling all of that information from our subject matter experts and our history and our materials, and saying, how much can we really put into one class at one time so we don't get this cognitive overload, or we don't burn out the students, and we don't save what they really need to learn in order to be successful for 3 years later. We want the biggest impact possible. So can you just talk a little bit about that decision-making process and maybe even tie it into sales about what people really need to know first to get the fastest results and how much they can consume?
Yeah. So, I mean, so you got to think about cognitive overload because that's a real thing, right? So you go to a lecture, you land on one or two things, and like you're like, yeah, man, that's it. But I forget the other eight things that the lecturer said. So working memory is a real issue. Some people take notes, they refer back to them, but that's not how most of us go through our lives on a day-to-day basis. We're absorbing information as we go along. We listen to a podcast. We watch a TV show, we watch a news clip, we watch a TikTok video, and then maybe we'll go to some more formalized long form learning like a virtual instructor-led session. And so what we really want to make sure we're doing there is capturing attention, generating that excitement, because actually when you have that engagement, that humor, that excitement level, it triggers the pathways in your brain to remember stuff better. That's why play is so important. And I know that you are passionate about play. And so our sessions are fun. They are high energy. So not only are we looking at the content in there, because that is really hard. We have to make sure that it's relevant, it's actionable, it tells a story for you to address a specific problem. But in that session, we're maintaining the energy flow in that session so that you're not exhausted because it's high energy all the time, but it gives you that time for deep reflection, but then brings that energy back up. So not only are we working on the concepts and techniques, but we're also thinking about energy management as you go through that session.
Yeah, just bandwidth and energy management is such a big deal. And you also kind of hinted at it there, but we've planned out that we start the session with some sort of, we call it a trap exercise, but like a myth busting or a way to make people think differently so that now we've gotten our brain activated. We're thinking in a new way. We're open to learning and an experience before we just start, cramming down. This is what you say. Here's the script. Say this, start practicing. And then you don't know why. And you're not really bought in. There is an order and a balance to all of these things, and redesigning and reimagining our program to fit all of this has been a big deal.
And if you actually look at, TED Talks, wildly popular. You look at their format, they start with that trap exercise. Now, it's not actually asking for feedback directly from the live audience, but that's the what they're asking you to do. The thinking that they're asking you to do is very, very similar. So that format works really well for getting people to open up to new ideas. It's getting you off balance. And actually, that relates to one of Sandler's sales techniques. I've always been fascinated by the overlap between sales and education best practices. I got my start in sales education and adult learning after I finished my grad school, my master's degree. And I came into it, I was focused on science education. And I was like, okay, well, we'll see where this job takes me, because I was going to do their e-learning build and get into the technology. And then I realized, oh my gosh, sales and education, you're kind of selling ideas here. So there's a lot of overlap. And so I absolutely love the Sandler technique of a pattern interrupt. So when you're thinking about having a conversation with a prospect or a buyer, you get that pattern interrupt. It opens up their thinking to new ideas and new information. And so that's one of the really cool things that we can teach, and that we also do as we're teaching you.
And to tie this back to collaborative learning and move us into the technique portion, getting people to help each other is a big deal. It's one of the things that I underestimated when I started Sandler. I started teaching the courses like 12 years ago now. And you would think sometimes when we have group courses or people of different industries together, it would be harder to teach. That you're like, oh, how do I use an example of software sales and construction like roofing, and then also medical equipment or something all in the same class? But what I found is in this collaborative environment, especially with different skill levels too, if you have newbies and you have experienced salespeople in the same room, somebody's struggling with a challenge and the other person goes, oh no, that's easy. In our industry, we just do this. We solved that a long time ago. Or an older salesperson goes, oh, I remember those days. I used to struggle with that price discussion. Here's how I handle it now. And this collaboration actually makes it easier to teach than if everybody's at the same level and everybody has the same experience and background, because then you don't have these opportunities to use different examples or see from different perspectives. So can you talk about some of the techniques we use in collaborative learning to encourage that sort of discovery?
Yeah, absolutely. So role play is huge in all of our sessions. So you're partnering up, you're like giving each other We try to do it in groups of 3, right? So you got one person who's being seller, one person's being buyer, one person's who's observing. Now that observer can feel a little bored sometimes, but it's really valuable because that's the person that can see both sides and say, hey, you did this really, really well. Here's how you might adjust it and get better. So we also do some training before we go into role plays. We talk about ways to give feedback because that's also really helpful, because you don't want somebody to just, put in 0 effort on a role play, because that doesn't make anybody better. And so we talk about those ground rules, but we get right into role play. The other thing that we do is we really strive to make it actionable, because when you have something that's coming out of theory and into real world application with live deals, we can design the best scenario, make you laugh with some weird puns about, jokes on big brands when we're creating scenarios and role plays. That can happen. But the best role plays and best scenarios to workshop are real deals. So we bring like live deals into our training sessions to talk through and beat up and give advice. So it's almost like a little win room for you when you come to one of our sessions. If you've got a real live problem, our Sandler trainers are there to help.
And one other thing I wanted to highlight here is that I typically find salespeople have one of 2 challenges. They're either too aggressive and they're too pushy and they're too excited about their products, or they're too passive, they're too slow, they're trying to be kind of almost too helpful, and they're not bringing any real value to this discussion. They're not challenging the person they're sitting across from. And when we do this collaborative learning, you get a mix of all those different personalities in one room. So when you hear somebody else say it, and sometimes even the trainer will say it stronger than it should be on a call, so that person, when they water it down or when they back it off a little bit, it ends up with the right assertiveness. And so you can hear people in those role plays deliver it maybe a little too soft or maybe a little too strong. And you can kind of learn to calibrate what you're doing through this collaborative learning, where if you're just doing it by yourself, you only have that one perspective and one personality. It's really tough.
That's absolutely true. And I think that the insights that you can get from those nuances from different peers of, now I say it this way, or here's the reverse that I usually lead with in this situation. And you might see it from a completely different industry or vertical, but it really is applicable to you. So that's where that crowdsourcing a lot of the information. One of the jobs that I have at Sandler is we have this huge client base, right? And we have this huge trainer base, and they're always feeding information back to us. So we've got to sift through that and look at what we're going to produce next. And some of our greatest insights come from our practitioners. And so that's where it can be really powerful, because you might have somebody who's been living and breathing Sandler for 20 years in that session, and somebody who's brand new to it, and they can learn a ton from each other, because even though you might have been doing for Sandler for 20 years, you don't know the latest technology out there and how, one of those tools out there that can give you insights on your buyer can give you better preparation before you get on that call, so that you can already be tailoring to their disc profile or what they're interested in based off of what their recent searches have been. So it's really cool stuff.
Yeah, and I want to give you one more shot at it here, specifically about our sales development series stuff that's coming out. We also have new collaborative learning options for enterprise teams, as well as local offices where you can join those public classes. But I was thinking about all of this, and we could really go on for days here, because this is what you and I do for a living and what Sandler does for a living, and there's so much to unpack. I think that one of the interesting things here is the discussions that happen with the leadership, that we give tools to the managers, and we have discussions outside of it, because you can then use collaborative learning on your own as like a pre-call planning, and like, how do we war games this? What's going to happen? What kind of questions do we want to ask on this call? Or debriefing the postmortem, whether it's a win or a loss. We can now have better questions to do collaborative learning afterwards. What did we learn from this win? How can we replicate that on other calls? What can we learn from this loss? So any other final thoughts on new tools that we've baked into the new sales development series, or other learning options and things that people should know about?
Yeah, so I mean, from a learning kit perspective, we try and make sure that we've got all the materials you need to really be successful, from that manager review guide. So how to set up your team meeting, reinforce whatever you just talked about, really drive application of it. And then when we do introduce a tool like a pre-call planner, we give really structured advice on when should you be reviewing this? How do you review it? How do you turn this into a collaboration between a manager and a rep? Or if you're in a team selling environment, how do you use that as your collaborative platform so that everybody knows what they're doing on the call, right? So sales increasingly, especially in the enterprise space, is becoming a team sport. You got the lone wolves that are out there selling those big deals. They think they're on an island doing it on their own. And some of them are, but increasingly it's a team sport. The handoff from your BDR matters just as much as the handoff to your customer success team. And so bringing everybody together to get them on the same page can really make an impact in terms of how buyers are making their selection criteria, because they're not just evaluating your products and services, they are evaluating what you bring to the table, how well organized you are, how polished that sales pitch is, because that reflects how buttoned up your product or service offering is.
Awesome. Such good stuff. I have two shameless plugs, and then we want to get to know Lisa a little bit better. Again, we've been talking with Lisa Ellis, our head of product here at Sandler, and two things. First, ask your Sandler trainer about the new sales development series and the new sales leader grow series, reimagined by Lisa and her team. Really cool stuff there. And if you don't have a trainer, go to sandler.com, click on locator and find a location near you. Or if you have more than one, access to these big organizations with multiple locations. And then our big collaborative environments and events are the Sandler Summit. So you can go to sandler.com/summit, join our community, collaborate with other top sales leaders and professionals from around the world and the top trainers, and see different personalities from your local office at the Sandler Summit or the virtual summit. Just go to sandler.com/summit for more information. Okay, Lisa, this is time for you to re-interview for your job here. I'm going to ask you my cheesy job interview questions. How do you define success at this point in your career?
I define success by going back to my stakeholders where I initiated a project, and doing interviews saying, how did this go? Did it work? And then ultimately, as a product leader, are we driving revenue and growth for the business, right? So that's really what I'm looking for in terms of success. But even though we might have a product launch that doesn't go as fast as we may have set targets for, there can be small wins in there, because I believe that really creating great experience for customers, learners, it's an iterative process. You think about a comedian who's working on their tight 10. That's kind of how I feel about when we create great learning experiences. I'm always looking for, how do we fine tune this? How do we make this into our tight 10 or tight 90 as a virtual instructor-led session? And so that's really what I look for: is, do we have happy learners coming out of it? Are we growing? Are we getting better adoption? And that's what success is.
And it's so amazing. I appreciate you saying that. I think it is definitely a continuous learning and process and improvement process, but also sometimes it's not the whole series. What I've experienced in my time at Sandler is sometimes there's just that one magic moment. And so we try to create 90 minutes and 90 different lessons or 3 years worth of stuff. But sometimes you just hear that one thing and that one class, and that's worth $1 million for you throughout your career or even on one deal. And it's such an amazing thing that I think as instructors and as instructional designers, we have to remember that, like, all right, that all doesn't have to be perfect. We just need that one magic spot, that one joke that lands that everybody tells for the rest of their life. And that makes it worth it. I love the analogy. On the flip side, was there a biggest lesson learned or a hurdle you had to get over in your career in order to be successful?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson I learned was, kind of don't let perfection get in the way of progress. That's the biggest one, because when I'm designing something, I have a tendency to iterate and go for it and try and get it just right to make it perfect. And that can slow you down. It can block you from getting the feedback you need to really make something great. And so that was a big lesson that I learned a few years ago in my career, and it's served me well.
Good stuff. Now, last one. Do you have a favorite Sandler rule or Sandler concept that you've uncovered?
I do. And it's, you talked about David Sandler's book, You Can't Learn How to Ride a Bike in a Seminar. And it really comes back to what attracted me to work for Sandler. There's a lot of players in the sales performance space. I wanted to be here because of the psychology and research back approach to our techniques. So it's really Sandler rule number one. Sales is a conversation between adults to uncover truth. And I think that is absolutely one of the most wonderful things that we can do for each other. And what I really like to bring to sales.
Yeah, like I said, it gets really meta. Sales is a collaboration. The sales training is a collaboration. When we work with our clients to design that, it's a collaboration. And we start collaborating about the collaboration, and then it gets really awkward and messy. So I appreciate you helping us sort it out today, Lisa. Again, for more information on Sandler, go to Sandler.com. You can subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening or watching it right now would be great. But more importantly, share it with somebody that you think needs to hear it. Share it with your sales leaders, your learning and development team. Help continue to grow and use it as a conversation starter to start your next collaboration. Until then, whatever you are, be a good one. That's what I always say. The How to Succeed podcast brought to you by Sandler. More information at Sandler.com.